All right, let's get this deep dive started. Today, we're taking a look at a topic that's pretty universal.
Let me guess. Is it about, well, sleep?
You got it. We're going to be diving into some of the key insights from Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. He's like a leading sleep scientist. You know, you might think you know a thing or two about sleep.
Oh, don't we all?
But trust me, this book, it really is an eye-opener. It challenges a lot of the things we think we know.
Well, it is fascinating. We spend a third of our lives asleep, but most of us don't really, know why.
Exactly. And Walker, he gets straight to the point. Right off the bat, he says sleep is Mother Nature's best effort yet at contra death.
Whoa.
I know, right? That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. But he really emphasizes that sleep is like the most effective way to, reset our brains and bodies each day.
So basically, it's like hitting that reset button.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. We live in a society that kind of, glorifies busyness.
Oh, tell me about it.
And sleep is often seen as something we can sacrifice. We pull all-nighters, we brag about how little sleep we get, push ourselves to the limit.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Why is that a problem? What's actually going on in our bodies when we sleep?
So one of the most fundamental things is something called the circadian rhythm.
Right, the circadian rhythm.
It's basically our internal biological clock, and it tells us when to feel sleepy and when to feel awake.
Okay, I've definitely heard of the circadian rhythm, but can you kind of explain it a bit more? What's actually controlling that rhythm?
So imagine this. It's the 1700s, right? And there's this scientist, Jean-Jacques Dortu de Meran, and he noticed this weird thing. Even in constant darkness, these plants, they kept opening and closing their leaves in a rhythmic pattern.
Interesting.
And this discovery, it led to, the idea that living things actually have their own internal timekeeping systems, kind of independent from, sunlight and stuff.
Well, plants have internal clocks.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, and for humans, it's not perfectly matched with the 24-hour day. If you isolate yourself from sunlight, your internal day, it would actually be a little bit longer than 24 hours.
Wow, I never knew that. That makes you think what other hidden rhythms are out there in nature.
Totally. And this internal clock, that's also what causes jet lag.
Right.
Because when we travel across time zones, our internal clock, it kind of struggles to catch up. And that's why we feel all groggy and disoriented, flying from San Francisco to London.
Yeah, even though it's morning in London, your body still thinks it's the middle of the night.
Exactly.
And speaking of feeling groggy, I think most of us rely on that morning coffee to kind of get us through the day.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening in our brain when we drink that caffeine?
Caffeine, it's a stimulant, right?
Yeah.
And it blocks this molecule called adenosine, which makes you feel sleepy. And throughout the day, the more you're awake, the more adenosine kind of builds up in your brain, and that creates this feeling of sleep pressure.
Okay, so it's building up, making us want to sleep more and more.
Yeah, exactly. But caffeine, it masks that feeling of sleepiness, but it doesn't get rid of the adenosine. It's still there.
Ah, so that's why we get that caffeine crash. That's the adenosine.
That's exactly right.
So caffeine's like a temporary Band-Aid for sleepiness.
Pretty much. And what's interesting? As we age, it actually takes longer for our bodies to eliminate caffeine. So as we get older, the sleep-disrupting effects of caffeine, they can actually become more pronounced.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, something to think about.
That's something to think about next time I reach for another cup.
Yeah.
But okay, eventually we all give in to sleep, thankfully.
Right.
But what's actually happening in our brains and bodies when we finally drift off?
Well, sleep isn't just one uniform state. It's more there are these different stages. We have NREM sleep and REM sleep. NREM stands for non-rapid eye movement sleep. And it goes from light sleep to deep sleep. And then there's REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep. And that's where most of our, vivid dreams happen.
Okay, so wait, but we're not actually moving our eyes rapidly when we're asleep, are we?
Well, so it's called that because our eyes are moving beneath our eyelids, but our bodies are basically paralyzed during this stage.
Oh, wow. So we're not actually acting out our dreams?
Nope. It's kind of a protective mechanism.
Oh, that's a good thing. Otherwise we'd be jumping out of bed every night.
So how do these different stages of sleep cycle throughout the night? How does that work?
Imagine you're sculpting with clay.
Okay.
So you start with this big block of clay, and it represents all the memories and experiences you've had during the day, right?
Okay, I'm following.
And so in the early part of the night, During deep NREM sleep, you're like chiseling away at that excess clay, removing unnecessary neural connections.
Okay.
Then, as you move into shorter bursts of REM sleep, it's like you're using finer tools to shape and refine the remaining details.
So it's a process of like refining. Exactly. Strengthening those important connections. And as the night goes on, this balance, it shifts. So REM sleep becomes more dominant towards the morning.
Okay.
So it's not just about the amount of sleep we get, it's also about the quality of sleep in each of these stages.
That makes a lot of sense.
So?
And I guess those needs probably change depending on where you are in life. Like, I know babies sleep a lot, and teenagers are always tired.
Yeah, exactly. And the book dives into how those needs change. For example, babies, they spend a ton of time in REM sleep because it's crucial for brain development. But then in late childhood and early adolescence, deep NREM sleep becomes more important. This is when the brain gets rid of unnecessary connections to refine those neural circuits.
Oh, wow. It's like our brains are constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's this constant cycle of growth and refinement, almost like the changing seasons.
That makes the finding that children with autism often have like 50% less REM sleep pretty concerning.
Absolutely. That's a big concern.
Right.
While we're still figuring out exactly how REM sleep and autism are connected, it shows us how important early detection and intervention are for any sleep abnormalities.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Definitely. You know, there's actually been studies where they deprived infant rats of REM sleep, and it led to some similar effects later in life.
That's interesting and a little bit scary. So getting enough of each type of sleep is really important, it seems, throughout our whole lives.
Yeah, it seems that way.
But what happens as we get older? I know a lot of like older people complain about their sleep, but what's actually changing in their brains?
Well, as we age, we see a decline in both the quantity and the quality of our sleep, especially deep MREM sleep.
Okay.
This is partly because our circadian rhythm changes, and we also produce less melatonin as we get older. Older adults tend to go to bed earlier, but their sleep, it becomes more fragmented, meaning they wake up more often throughout the night.
Oh, so they go to bed earlier, but they don't necessarily sleep better.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And this loss of deep sleep, well, it can actually have some real consequences for our learning, our memory, and just overall health.
So it sounds like there are things we can do to try and, combat that, right?
Yeah, there are. The book suggests that older adults could try shifting their bedtime to later by exposing themselves to bright light in the late afternoon. It can help nudge their internal clock back a little bit.
That's good to know. It sounds like we can be more proactive about protecting our sleep as we age. But let's talk about what happens when any of us, regardless of age, just don't get enough sleep.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting, maybe a little bit scary.
Lay it on me. How bad is it, really?
Well, the book, it goes really deep into the consequences of sleep deprivation, and trust me, they're pretty eye-opening.
Okay, I'm ready. What are some of the things that can happen when we skimp on sleep?
Well, for one thing, studies have actually shown that when you're sleep deprived, it really messes with your cognitive performance, kind of like, being drunk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was this one study, they had people do a simple test where they had to, press a button when they saw a light.
Okay, sounds pretty straightforward.
It was, but, the researchers started messing with their sleep, restricting it, and they found that with each night of not getting enough sleep, the people, they just got worse at the test.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and what's even crazier, they totally underestimated how bad they were doing. They didn't even realize how much it was affecting them.
So, kind of like when someone's had too much to drink and thinks they're totally fine to drive?
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
That's a scary thought.
It is. And the book, it totally debunks this idea that some people can just function on a few hours of sleep and be fine.
Yeah, I've heard people say that.
One expert, Dr. Thomas Roth, he puts it like this. The number of people who can survive on 5 hours of sleep or less without any impairment is 0.
0. Wow. Okay, so there's really no getting around it. We all need adequate sleep.
We really do. It's not just about feeling a bit tired or slow either. Right.
The book connects chronic sleep loss to some pretty serious health problems. We're talking heart disease, metabolic disorders, even cancer.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that not getting enough sleep could increase my risk of, a heart attack or cancer.
I know, it sounds crazy,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, sadly, it's true. Large-scale studies have found a strong connection between short sleep duration and an increased risk of all sorts of things, like heart disease, stroke, you name it.
Okay, but how does, like, lack of sleep affect our heart health? Is it just because of the added stress?
It's more than just stress. You see, sleep deprivation really messes with how our blood pressure is regulated, and that puts extra strain on our whole cardiovascular system. Even losing a little bit of sleep can affect your blood vessels.
Okay, I am officially worried now.
And there's more bad news. It also throws our metabolism completely out of whack. You know, sleep loss disrupts our hormones, and it makes us crave all those sugary processed foods that aren't good for us.
So it's not just about willpower and making healthy choices, you know? When you're sleep deprived, your body is actually working against you.
So we're fighting a losing battle when we're tired.
Pretty much. And it doesn't just stop at our physical health either.
Okay.
The book really gets into this profound link between sleep and our mental health.
Right.
Did you know that sleep disturbances are actually present in every single major psychiatric condition?
Wow, seriously?
Yeah. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, you name it, they all have sleep problems associated with them.
So sleep is just as important for our minds as it is for our bodies.
100%. And researchers have actually been debating this for a long time. You know, what came first, the mental health problems or the sleep problems? Like, is it the mental illness that's causing the sleep problems, or is it the other way around?
Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right. And while it used to be thought that mental disorders were the root cause of the sleep problems, this book actually presents some evidence that sleep deprivation itself can actually trigger negative moods and make people more emotionally reactive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it kind of turns into this nasty cycle where the sleep loss makes the mental health problems even worse, and the mental health problems make it harder to sleep.
It's a two-way street, not just a one-way.
Exactly. And you can see this really clearly in the research on sleep and depression. Some studies have actually shown that sleep deprivation can, get this, have a short-term therapeutic effect for some people with depression.
Wait, really? So you're saying that sometimes, like, less sleep can actually make their mood better? I don't understand how that's possible.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, right? But the book suggests that it might be because sleep deprivation can change how sensitive the reward centers in our brains are. So maybe it makes them more responsive to positive emotions.
Interesting. But it sounds like something that could be potentially dangerous to try without, some professional guidance.
Oh, absolutely. Sleep deprivation should never be considered a treatment for depression.
Right.
It's a complex issue, and it needs professional help.
Absolutely. Definitely need to get the right help for that. But going back to the link between sleep and mental health, you mentioned earlier that sleep disturbances are found in all major psychiatric conditions, including PTSD. I'm curious about that. How does sleep factor into trauma recovery?
Well, that's a key point, and the book explores this really fascinating concept of sleep as, like, overnight therapy.
Overnight therapy, okay.
Yeah. Specifically, they focus on the role of REM sleep in processing those really difficult emotional memories. And the idea is that it can help reduce the emotional intensity of those traumatic experiences over time.
So it's not about forgetting the trauma, but it's more like processing it in a way that makes it less, overwhelming.
Exactly. And that's where the research on dreams gets super interesting.
Okay, yeah.
Walker talks about this study where they had people keep detailed dream journals, right? And they would compare them to what happened to them during the day, their daily experiences.
Oh, so they were trying to see if people's dreams were basically just replays of what happened during the day.
Well, that's what they thought might happen, but it turned out it wasn't quite that literal. They discovered that dreams don't actually replay those events exactly as they happened. Instead, they often reflect the emotional concerns, even if the dream itself seems totally random or like it has nothing to do with the actual event.
So it's like our dreams are helping us work through those tough emotions.
Yeah.
Even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Exactly. And this overnight therapy effect, it seems to be especially important for people who are struggling with PTSD because they often have really intense nightmares.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are there things, like besides traditional therapy, that can help with those nightmares?
Well, the book mentions this really interesting discovery that happened kind of by chance. It turns out they started using this medication called prazosin, originally for high blood pressure, to treat PTSD-related nightmares.
Wait. A blood pressure medication for nightmares? How does that even work?
So it turns out prazosin also blocks this neurotransmitter called noradrenaline. It's involved in the stress response, and it can actually disrupt REM sleep. So by lowering noradrenaline during sleep, prazosin actually allows REM sleep to do its therapeutic work, without being interrupted. And this helps to reduce how often people have nightmares and how intense they are.
That's pretty fascinating. It shows how interconnected our brains and bodies really are.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of interconnectedness, I want to move on to another really important area, and that's sleep and its impact on learning and memory. We talked about all-nighters earlier, and I know a lot of us have pulled them at some point thinking we were being, super productive.
The myth of the productive all-nighter.
Yeah.
Well, get ready to have that myth busted. Walker actually did a study using MRI scans to look at what happens in the brain when people pull all-nighters. And what he found was that all-nighters actually hinder learning and memory consolidation.
Really?
Yeah. The people who were sleep-deprived showed much less activity in a part of their brain called the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory formation, compared to those who got a full night's rest.
Oh, man. So those all-night study sessions I pulled in college were actually making it harder for me to learn and remember the material.
Probably. It's a really common misconception. We think we're getting more done by staying up late, but actually we're doing ourselves a disservice.
I wish someone told me this back then.
Yeah. So how does sleep actually help us learn and remember things?
Yeah, how does it work?
Well, the book explains that sleep, particularly deep NREM sleep, is absolutely essential for consolidating our memories. It's almost like, transferring files from your computer's short-term memory to its hard drive.
Okay. Yeah.
Like it's the save button for our experiences.
So it's not just passively storing memories, it's like actively processing and integrating them.
Exactly. And when we don't get enough sleep, that process gets disrupted. There have even been studies on rats that show it's almost impossible for them to strengthen the connections in their brain that form new memories, if they are deprived of sleep.
So it's like trying to build a house without a foundation. Is that why sleep problems are sometimes seen as an early warning sign of Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, there's a strong correlation between having less deep sleep and the buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain. That's one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's.
Oh.
And Walker actually thinks that sleep disruption might be a key factor in how Alzheimer's develops. He found that the people with the worst deep sleep were the ones who also had the most amyloid buildup. And that led to serious memory problems. It's this chain reaction, and sleep disruption is a major link in that chain.
So you're saying it's not just that people with Alzheimer's have trouble sleeping, but those sleep problems might actually be contributing to the disease itself.
That's what the research is pointing towards, yeah. Walker actually believes that sleep patterns could be used as a really valuable early diagnostic tool for Alzheimer's. If we could identify people who are at risk years before they actually start showing symptoms, we might be able to intervene early and maybe even slow down the progression of the disease.
That would be amazing. Okay, all of this is pretty alarming, I have to admit.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping the book doesn't just focus on, the scary stuff.
Oh, don't worry. It's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
It also gives a lot of practical advice on how to get better sleep and how to deal with common sleep disorders.
Okay, good. Because at this point, I need some good news. So where do we start? What are some of the things that we can actually do to improve our sleep?
Well, one of the simplest things, and yet it's also one of the most powerful, is creating an environment that is truly sleep conducive. We're talking making sure your bedroom is dark, it's quiet, and it's cool.
Okay, that sounds simple enough. But what about people who live in noisy neighborhoods or have partners who snore? What are they supposed to do?
Well, earplugs and eye masks can be lifesavers for blocking out all that noise and light.
Okay, I've got to admit, I've always been a bit skeptical of those, but, I'm willing to give it a try. What about the temperature? How cool are we talking?
Walker suggests aiming for a bedroom temperature around 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
65. Okay.
Yeah, it might sound a bit chilly, but our body temperature naturally drops as we fall asleep.
So, being all cozy and bundled up in a warm bed might actually be working against us.
It might be, yeah. Think about how much easier it is to fall asleep on, a cool summer night compared to a stifling summer day.
That's true. I definitely sleep better when it's cooler. What about those nights when, you just can't seem to fall asleep no matter how hard you try? I've tried everything.
Yeah.
Counting sheep, drinking warm milk, reading a book. Nothing seems to work.
Sounds like you might be dealing with insomnia.
Oh, no.
Which is the most common sleep disorder.
Is it? Oh, wow. What causes insomnia? Is it just stress and anxiety?
Those things definitely play a role, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. The book talks about several physiological and psychological factors that can disrupt sleep, including, an elevated body temperature, hormonal imbalances, and even those thought loops that just keep our minds racing at night.
Right.
So it's not just about relaxing your mind. There are actual, physical processes that can interfere with sleep.
Yeah, so it's not all in our heads.
Nope. And that's why simply trying to force yourself to sleep can often backfire. Because when you're lying there worrying about not being able to sleep, it just makes you more anxious, and that makes it even harder to fall asleep.
It's like a cruel joke. The more we try to sleep, the more elusive it becomes.
Exactly. But the good news is there are actually effective treatments for insomnia.
Okay, good.
Walker strongly recommends something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. He sees it as the first-line treatment for insomnia.
I've heard of CBT for things like anxiety and depression, but how does it work for insomnia?
CBTI is all about changing the thoughts and behaviors that are contributing to your sleep problems. So it involves techniques like sleep restriction therapy, stimulus control therapy, and relaxation techniques.
So it's not about just taking a pill to knock yourself out. It's more like retraining your brain and body to develop healthier sleep habits.
Exactly. And the research shows that CBTI is incredibly effective. It can help people fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up feeling more rested.
That's amazing. But okay, what about those nights when we need a little extra help? Are sleeping pills ever a good option?
Walker is pretty cautious about sleeping pills. While they might give some temporary relief, the research actually shows that they don't offer many objective benefits, beyond just the placebo effect.
Really? So it's mostly in our heads. That's kind of surprising.
It seems so. And the book actually points out that there can be some pretty serious side effects from taking those pills. Things like an increased risk of infection, feeling drowsy during the day, rebound insomnia when you stop taking them, and even the possibility of becoming dependent on them.
Okay, yeah, those are some pretty serious risks to consider. Makes you think twice about popping those pills.
Definitely. There are safer, more sustainable options out there, like CBTI and making those lifestyle changes we talked about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we talked about insomnia, which is really common. But what about some of those less common sleep disorders, like narcolepsy? What is that exactly, and how does it affect people?
Narcolepsy is a neurological disorder that causes extreme daytime sleepiness and these sudden, uncontrollable sleep attacks.
Oh, wow.
It's not as common as insomnia. It affects about 1 in 2,000 people.
Okay.
But it can be incredibly disruptive to people's lives.
I've heard of that. It sounds pretty scary to just suddenly fall asleep without warning.
It can be very dangerous. And to make matters worse, narcolepsy often comes with a bunch of other really challenging symptoms, like things like sleep paralysis, cataplexy, and even hallucinations.
Sleep paralysis, cataplexy, those sound terrifying.
They can be. Sleep paralysis is basically when you temporarily can't move or speak while you're falling asleep or waking up. So it's like you're trapped inside your own body. And cataplexy is the sudden loss of muscle control, usually triggered by strong emotions like laughter or excitement. It can even make people collapse. Then there are the hallucinations, which are basically like vivid, dreamlike experiences that happen while you're awake.
Wow, that sounds incredibly disruptive and disturbing.
Yeah.
What actually causes narcolepsy?
Well, the book explains that it's thought to be caused by a lack of this neurotransmitter called orexin.
Orexin.
It's really important for regulating our sleep-wake cycle.
Okay.
And this deficiency can be genetic, or sometimes it can happen if the immune system attacks the cells in the brain that make orexin.
So it's like the brain's sleep-wake switch is kind of malfunctioning?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Without enough orexin, the brain has a really hard time staying awake, and that's what leads to those sudden, uncontrollable sleep attacks.
That's a scary thought. Is there anything that can be done to treat it? Like, can people with narcolepsy lead normal lives?
While there isn't a cure for narcolepsy, there are medications and lifestyle changes that can help people manage their symptoms. Stimulants can help them stay more alert during the day, and antidepressants can sometimes reduce the frequency of cataplexy and some of the other symptoms.
So there is hope.
Absolutely. With the right treatment and support, people with narcolepsy can live full and meaningful lives.
That's good to hear. Okay, this has been a lot of information to process, both the good and the, kind of scary stuff.
Right.
It's definitely made me realize just how vital sleep is for every aspect of our health and well-being.
Absolutely. Sleep is so much more than just something we do to feel rested. It's essential for our physical health, mental health, and even our cognitive abilities. It really does affect everything.
Okay, so we've covered like the science behind sleep, the consequences of sleep deprivation, and even some tips on how to improve our sleep quality.
Yeah.
But there's one aspect we haven't really touched on yet, and that's the ethics of sleep deprivation. I mean, it's one thing to accidentally skimp on sleep, but what about situations where it's intentionally inflicted on someone, like as a form of punishment or a way to get information during interrogation?
Yeah, you're right. That's a really important but unsettling topic to address. And the book, it does delve into that darker side of sleep deprivation, looking at how it's been used as a tool of torture and interrogation.
It's pretty disturbing to think that something as essential as sleep can be weaponized.
It really is. Sleep deprivation has been used throughout history as a form of torture because it's just so effective at breaking down an individual's resistance.
Why is that? How does a lack of sleep make us so vulnerable?
Well, remember how we talked about the prefrontal cortex being like the control center of our brains?
Yeah.
Well, sleep deprivation really impairs the prefrontal cortex. So basically, it can't do its job of, regulating our thoughts, our emotions, and our impulses as effectively.
So we're basically running on fumes, with no filter and very little self-control.
Pretty much. We become more impulsive, we're more emotionally reactive, and we're less able to think clearly and critically. That's why it's such a powerful tool for coercion. It really weakens our defenses and makes us much more susceptible to suggestion.
That's pretty chilling to think about. I remember the book mentioned a study about REM sleep deprivation specifically.
Yeah.
What were the findings of that study?
Oh, it was a really disturbing study. They selectively deprived these participants of REM sleep for, get this, 7 nights in a row.
7 nights. Wow.
And the results were shocking.
I bet they were. Did they just become super cranky and irritable?
Oh, it was way worse than that. By night 3, they were actually starting to show signs of psychosis, like anxiety, mood swings, hallucinations, paranoia. Some of them actually became convinced that the researchers were plotting against them or even trying to poison them.
Wow, so basically severe sleep deprivation can actually induce psychosis.
That's what the research suggests, and it really highlights how profound of an impact sleep has on our mental and emotional well-being. It's not an exaggeration to say that sleep is, it's essential for our sanity.
Okay, that's definitely a sobering thought. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a more, everyday ethical dilemma, which is sleep deprivation in the workplace.
Okay, yeah.
We all know that lots of jobs require, long hours and crazy schedules, but at what point does pushing ourselves actually turn into putting ourselves and others at risk?
That's such a crucial question to consider, and the book really dives into this culture of sleep deprivation that's so prevalent in so many workplaces, especially healthcare, where the consequences can be just dire.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've heard some pretty scary stories about medical residents having to work these incredibly long shifts and make life or death decisions while being severely sleep deprived.
Yeah, it's a dangerous practice, and the book actually traces the roots of this grueling work schedule back to a really flawed training model that was established by this surgeon, Dr. William Stewart Halstead. He was brilliant, but he was also a cocaine addict, and ironically, he believed that pushing doctors to their absolute limits was the only way to make them resilient and skilled.
Wait, so the current system of medical training is based on the practices of a cocaine addict?
I know, right? Pretty crazy. And despite all the evidence we have now about the dangers of sleep deprivation, this culture of overwork is still alive and well in a lot of medical institutions.
It just seems so irresponsible to let sleep-deprived doctors make those kinds of critical decisions about their patients' lives.
It really is a serious problem, and studies have actually shown that sleep deprivation impairs cognitive function to the same degree as being drunk.
Oh, wow.
After 22 hours without sleep, your performance is equivalent to someone who's legally drunk.
That is terrifying. I'm surprised there aren't stricter rules in place to prevent this.
There have been some attempts to reform, resident work hours, but they've been largely inadequate. For example, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, they made some changes that limit first-year residents to an 80-hour work week.
80 hours? That's still an average of over 11 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Exactly. And a lot of times those guidelines are totally ignored anyway. Even the Institute of Medicine has come out and said that working more than 16 hours straight without sleep is dangerous for both patients and doctors, but people are still doing it.
It's mind-boggling that we haven't addressed this issue more effectively. We need a complete overhaul of healthcare culture, one that puts sleep as a top priority for both patients and medical professionals.
I couldn't agree more. And the shift in thinking needs to happen in every single workplace where sleep deprivation is tolerated, or even worse, encouraged. We need to challenge the assumption that longer work hours automatically means better productivity.
Absolutely. There's studies that have actually shown that sleep-deprived employees, they make more mistakes, they're less productive, and they have higher rates of absenteeism and presenteeism, which means they are physically at work, but mentally they are just not there.
Right. It's not just about personal health, it's a business issue too.
Exactly. One study actually found that insufficient sleep cost companies almost $2,000 per employee each year, and that was just in lost productivity.
Wow.
Yeah, and for those who are the most sleep-deprived, the cost skyrocketed to over $3,500 per employee per year. So, businesses are literally losing millions of dollars because of sleep deprivation. It's time for them to wake up, no pun intended, and realize that supporting their employees' sleep isn't just the right thing to do. It's good for business, too.
I completely agree. Creating a workplace culture that values sleep, it benefits everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the ethics of sleep deprivation in a few different contexts, from torture and interrogation to, the everyday workplace. But I want to zoom out a bit now and talk about sleep education in general. I mean, if sleep is so important, why aren't we learning about it from a young age? Like, why isn't it part of the regular school curriculum?
That's a great question. And the book does point out how shockingly little sleep education there is in our society. Walker tells a story about how he asked a bunch of people from all walks of life, if they had ever gotten any formal education about sleep. And not a single one of them had.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And this lack of awareness, it's a huge public health issue.
It's surprising when you think about it.
Yeah.
We learn about nutrition, exercise, dental hygiene from a young age, but sleep, which is arguably just as important, gets completely ignored.
It really is a huge oversight in our education system. We should be teaching kids and teenagers about the science of sleep, about what happens when they don't get enough sleep, and most importantly, about how they can actually improve their sleep quality.
It's like we're sending kids out into the world without even teaching them how to take care of their own brains.
Exactly. And this lack of education has real consequences. It feeds this myth that sleep is a luxury instead of a necessity, and it contributes to the massive amount of sleep deprivation that we see all around us.
You're right. It's not just about teaching kids, how to get a good night's sleep, It's about changing the entire conversation around sleep and making it a real priority, just like any other health behavior.
Absolutely. We need a complete paradigm shift in how we think about sleep and how we value sleep, both individually and as a society.
So I have one final big picture question for you. What does a future where sleep is truly prioritized look like? What would that kind of society be like?
That's a great question, and the book gives us these glimpses of hope into what that kind of sleep-centered society could be.
All right, I'm all ears. Paint me a picture of this sleep utopia.
Well, first and foremost, workplaces would actually value their employees' sleep. They would recognize that well-rested employees are more productive, they're more creative, and they're more engaged.
Yeah.
Schools would actually teach sleep education as a standard part of their curriculum.
Right.
So kids would be learning about this from a young age. And healthcare systems, they would put sleep at the forefront of patient care. They would understand that sleep is crucial for healing and recovery.
That all sounds amazing, but it seems like a pretty big shift from where we are right now.
Oh, it would require huge cultural change, for sure. But I think it's possible. Imagine a world where people aren't embarrassed to say they prioritize sleep, where taking a nap is seen as a form of self-care, not laziness, and where everyone understands that getting enough sleep is a fundamental human right.
Now, that is a vision I can get behind.
Right.
I think this book makes a really strong case for why we need to be working towards that future.
It does.
But for our listeners who are ready to take action right now, like today, what's one small change they can make to improve their sleep?
One of the easiest but most effective things is just to set up a consistent sleep schedule. Try going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time every day, even on the weekends. It helps regulate your body's natural sleep-wake cycle, making it easier to fall asleep and wake up feeling refreshed.
That's a great tip, and it's something everyone can do, right? Like, they don't need any special equipment or therapy.
Exactly. It's all about making those small, sustainable changes that make sleep a priority.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to wrap up our deep dive into why we sleep.
Yeah,
It's been a fascinating, eye-opening journey into the world of sleep.
definitely has.
But before we say goodnight, I want to leave our listeners with this question. What one small change can you make today to improve your sleep? Think about it. Sweet dreams, and we'll catch you in the next deep dive.
It's a good question to ask ourselves. After all, we've learned that sleep, it's not just some luxury. It's absolutely essential, and it's not just about the quantity, like how many hours we're clocking in. It's about the quality of those hours as well.
That's right. You heard it here, folks. Sleep is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's time to take back our right to a good night's sleep without feeling guilty or, like we're being lazy or unproductive.
It's true. Sleep, it really is the foundation for everything. Our physical health, our mental and emotional well-being, even how sharp our minds are. When we make sleep a priority, we're not just investing in feeling good today, we're actually safeguarding our health for the future.
So what small change are you going to make today to get better sleep? Sweet dreams. And until next time, keep diving deep.
恭喜你又听完了一本书，订阅以便不错过更多精彩节目，也别忘了分享给你的朋友，一起快乐听书学英语。